Now that Bridget's here, we can start the meeting. Meeting will come to order, please. The notice requirements of the Open Public Meetings Act for this meeting have been satisfied. A copy of the annual meeting notice was sent to the press at Down Beach Current, posted on the bulletin board in the municipal building, on the municipal website, and filed in the office of the city clerk. Would you take a second, turn off all electronic equipment as we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Attention, salute. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Would you call the roll, please, Johanna?
Mayor Becker?
Here.
Commissioner Amadeo?
Here.
Commissioner Blumberg?
I'm here.
We have the swearing in of a new police officer. John?
Thank you, Mayor. Chief.
Come on up, Bridget.
It's a good day today. Stephen, please repeat after me. I, and state your name.
I, Stephen Edelbach,
Do solemnly and sincerely promise
do sincerely and solemnly promise
and swear
and swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States of America
support the Constitution of the United States of America,
and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey,
the Constitution of the State of New Jersey,
and that I will faithfully,
impartially,
and justly perform
and justly perform
and discharge all the duties
of
the Office of Law Enforcement Officer
of the Office of Law Enforcement Officer
in the City of Margate
in the City of Margate
to the best of my ability
to the best of my ability
and understanding.
and understanding.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations. Good luck in the academy. Stephen starts Monday in the academy. We had no choice but to move it right along because we have to fill our ranks in our police department. So we welcome him as a police officer in, what's it, 5 months? 24 weeks. And he'll go through our local training, and he'll be on the street. I need you to sign right here.
I guess.
Congratulations. Great job. Good.
Swearing in? That makes it swearing. Yeah. Fred, it should be full. I just... Batteries shouldn't be dead. Turn off the challenge. I know, but the challenge it should be
You ready? You guys ready? Chief? All right. We will now have a presentation from Mr. Ponzio. It's the Phase 1 final study for post-Sandy development.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Mayor, everyone else. Just real quickly, our work is done at this point. I just wanted to thank everyone, the 3 commissioners especially, Scott as well, for the help you've given us and the confidence you had in our firm. We worked hard on this. We think we delivered a nice product, and we hope you agree. John's going to go through a few of the things in the report very quickly, and if you have any questions, we're here to answer all of them. But again, I just want to thank you so much for having the confidence in us. Thank you.
Thank you, Art.
Thank you very much.
Your synopsis is this.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is John Barnhart, for those of you who don't know me. I work with Arthur Ponzio Company. I've been there for approximately 20 years. I'm a licensed professional engineer, licensed professional planner, and we were fortunate enough to work with the City of Margate for the better part of a year as part of the Post-Sandy Assistance Planning Grant Program, the Phase 1 portion of that program. Our work consisted of essentially 4 different aspects. Aspect 1 is what was called the environmental design of the Bayfront area. Aspect 2 is the environmental design for Amherst Avenue Business District. Aspect 3 is the environmental design of the beachfront area. And then finally, we made, in working with staff, we made some recommended modifications to certain sections of the land use ordinance. I'm just going to but I think most of you have these books that I'm looking at here. I'm going to take you just quickly, section by section. If anybody, if you, I don't know if you've had the opportunity to review them before tonight. If not, obviously if you see something in the coming days and you want to give us a call, we're happy to walk through anything specific with you. But I'm just going to give you a quick overview of each one of the sections. So if you turn to section A, that's the bayfront analysis of bulkhead conditions and water depths. So what our firm did here was essentially provide the City of Margate a tremendous tool with regard to your existing conditions of your bayfront area, the depths of your lagoons, the depths of your bay area, your channel areas, and also provide a detailed analysis with regard to condition and elevations of all of the bulkheads along your bayfront area. If you just turn to the second page in that section, which is labeled page 1 of 95, you'll see a yellow line that highlights the scope of the area. So you'll see that the pages that come after that give you a detailed analysis of each one of those waterfront lots, as well as toward the back of that section, you'll see we provided survey as well as bathymetric, which are water depth surveys of the entire bayfront lagoon area. So it's become a tremendous tool for the City of Margate. We were able to achieve this within the funds of the planning grant. And as I understand it, Margate has actually already been able to use this on a number of different occasions, been able to use this information in studying their bayfront and bulkhead issues within the community. If you then moving on quickly to section B, that was the second part of the commissioned items that we were asked to study, and you can see a series of slides there that essentially are a proposed concept for what we believe Amherst Avenue could and should be going into the future with regard to supporting your business district. As you flip through them, you'll see a lot of existing conditions and existing site evaluation topics. And then as you move forward, we've made some recommendations with regard to what could be done with parking along Amherst Avenue, what potential options you have for widening the pedestrian corridor along the bayfront. And then we've developed, with the help of Mazer Consulting, we've developed a number of conceptual ideas with regard to improvements of that to create a boardwalk type effect along the waterfront of Amherst Avenue to help support the business district and provide good circulation for both pedestrians and motorists in a safe fashion. And again, if you, I'm not going to go through each and every slide, but if you have any specific questions, you're certainly feel free to reach out to us so we can go through details as you wish. Absolutely.
One question I have. Because we're seeking a grant to build a brand-new bulkhead along the entire length of Amherst Avenue.
Yes.
So your recommendation is 9-foot elevation at 1988.
That's correct.
Do you feel there's any negative impact? In other words, how much higher will 9 feet be what's there? We're going to see a long wall along Amherst Avenue. And is 9, does it have to be 9, or could there be a range, perhaps?
Based on the concept that we have laid out, the way that we envision it is that bulkhead would be at 9. It would essentially act as your fall protection from the water area. And it would be approximately shoulder, not shoulder, but like chest height as you would walk along there. So is there...
If you have the boardwalk.
Correct.
Well, what if you don't have the boardwalk?
Our boardwalk, as we laid it out in concept, was only about 6 inches above the grade that's there now. So it's not a huge difference, Scott. Is there an impact? From across the street, yeah, there's going to be an impact. You're going to see less of the water's edge. Is there an impact if you're walking along it? In my opinion, no. There's no negative impact. Because what happens is, as you know now, you've got the bulkhead down low, you've got the fence structure, you've got a lot going on there. This then becomes just a clean bulkhead that becomes your fall protection. You face the front of it, it becomes a nice looking promenade that you're walking along. You can see right over it, but it would be hard for you to jump over it. So we think 9 works there. Obviously, and as we get into the ordinance discussion at the end of this, that's I think probably the biggest part of that discussion, so we'll maybe talk about it a little further at that point. But we believe that elevation 9 does work there.
Okay. But just so everybody understands,
Sure.
a board of the bulkhead there will not stop Amherst Avenue from flooding.
Just a bulkhead alone along Amherst Avenue is not going to stop Amherst Avenue from flooding. I would agree with that statement, yes.
See, it's vital importance. We're making this grant application within the next 3 weeks.
Okay.
So we really have to have this design down. So this decision's got to be made pretty soon. But we're shooting for over $3 million to put a brand-new bulkhead in, the length of Amherst. That's why I'm asking the question.
Okay.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I know you can answer.
That's why we're here. Yep.
Question, John.
Yep.
The existing bulkhead that is along where your proposed promenade, is it what, like 7?
Yeah. Give me 1 second. I can get you some exact numbers.
Just so that we can get an idea
Sure,
where 9 takes us, because this is one of the critical decisions we have to make moving forward, as you just mentioned. On an average,
Decking
7.
I've got it right here, Artie.
It's around 5.5 right now.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
It depends. Washington Avenue,
well, it varies, but, okay.
Jefferson Avenue is 5.7. Limburgis is 6.4. If you go towards Longport, she starts going up. But at the city park, we're below 5.
Okay. Your proposed conceptual of your promenade, is that on grade, the existing grade that exists now, like where the sidewalk is?
Part of that concept was to actually be able to elevate that area a little bit and then build the boardwalk on top of that. So it would be, let's say, from existing grade as it sits now, pushing a foot higher than what it is now.
Okay.
And that was the concept. Again, it hasn't been designed, but that was
Right.
the concept.
That-
The
that-
whole goal was to have about a 42-inch high railing from top of bulkhead to where your feet
A
are.
natural barrier?
Correct.
Okay, great.
Correct. That avoids the need for the fencing and all the other items, and it provides you that protection to a much higher elevation.
Thank you.
Unless there's any other questions with regard to the Amherst piece, the next section, Section C in the book, is essentially the same kind of study that we did on the bayfront area, we did for the ocean front. Obviously, obviously, we didn't do anything with regard to water depths in that area, but we did analyze the bulkhead conditions and beach conditions and topography of the beach for the entire, within the entire corporate boundary of the city of Margate. And what's interesting is what we found is we do a lot of bulkhead design work, a lot of work with a lot of private developers with regard to reconstruction or single-family home construction. And what we found with both of these studies that I found personally very interesting is we feel like we've done them all. I mean, we're doing them all the time. We feel like, that's not the case. There are still a lot more bulkheads in this town that need to be reconstructed, both public and private. So we're making some recommendations in our ordinance section for a higher elevation than many folks are currently building their bulkheads at. but we are of the opinion that it's not too late for that. I mean, it's not that there's so many new bulkheads built that, well, what are we doing? We're wasting our effort. There's still a lot more to do, and we think when you look at this, when you look at all this information, the point of it is to try to create a sustainable community, not just for today, but long into the future. So that was the drive behind some of the recommendations and decisions that we made. But this piece of it, again, is similar to what we did on the bayfront. It gives you a property by property. You've got color photographs of every property. You can look at each one of those bulkhead conditions. We've got heights of every one of the bulkheads. Again, it's a tremendous tool for Margate to really be able to make some decisions into the future with future projects. And then finally, I think is probably the biggest area of discussion for tonight, is we've made some recommendations with regard to ordinance changes. And many of them, I'm going to go through each one, but a lot of them I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, because many of them are really just cleanup items. While we were in the process of doing this, they were cleanup items of things that have maybe been interpreted over the years but differently by different people. We're just trying to clarify some things. And then the two biggest items are with regard to our recommendation on bulkhead height, and then also our recommendation on deck height. So, like I said, I'll go through, I'm going to go through each one of them. So I'm in, just so everyone's on the same spot, I'm going to page 1 of 12, which is in the ordinance recommendations section. And you can see at the bottom of that page, you see the targeted ordinance sections. There's about a half a dozen different ordinance sections that we identified and have recommended some modifications to. The first being with regard to specific design standards. And if you go to page 2 of 12, I'll go down these briefly. The first one deals with landscaping or street trees in the beach block. They've been an issue for years. Do you have them? Do you not have them? They cause view blockages. They're hard to sustain. They're hard to maintain because of the sand and the wind. What we've recommended is that we prohibit trees to be planted within the front yard setback, as opposed to the prior ordinance, which said that they were optional. So we think it kind of clears up a bunch of issues. I think it will help with a lot of disputes between neighbors. And frankly, it's very difficult to make those trees out front live very well in that beach block because of the environmental conditions. Within that same section, we made a recommendation with regard to fences and walls, currently permitted to be constructed a height of 5 feet from grade of curb, and we recommended it to be lowered to 4 feet. Moving on further, there's some language with regard to decorative trellises that was a little bit unclear in the ordinance, so we clarified the maximum total length of a decorative trellis to be 16 feet for any given property. Moving on to the next section that we made some recommended changes is 175-30, which is supplemental yard regulations. It was really just to clarify, item 3 here on page 2 of 12 is to clarify what a side yard is for a beachfront lot, essentially. Moving on yet further to section 175-30. There have been many applications to the Planning and Zoning Board with regard to exterior stairs to upper floors. It's become kind of a normal type of architectural request for many applications, and what we've done here is we're proposing to modify this section of the ordinance to allow steps from a first level deck to go up to a second level deck, but no further. Currently, there are no exterior stairs permitted, so that's always been a variance, and it's a consistent request, and we think based on current architectural standards, we think it's an appropriate request, and rather than burden your Planning and Zoning Board with that request over and over again, we thought it was appropriate to just make that modification, but we're still protecting against upper levels, so you can't build exterior stairs from the second to third level, for example. Moving on further, section 175-33 is a clarification with regard to the position of freestanding garages on a lot as measured from the rear lot line. Again, it's really just to clarify the language in the ordinance. And then the next section is probably one that warrants the most discussion other than the bulkhead topic, is 175-33, accessory structures and uses. Your current ordinance has item 3, which deals with decks and patios. We have eliminated that section 3 and developed a new section 9 to spell out the requirements for decks and patios for all given lot types, whether they be landlocked lots in the middle of the island, whether they be oceanfront lots, or whether they be bulkheaded lagoon lots or bayfront lots. But the gist of it is that what we're recommending is that decks in the rear yard are permitted to be 1 foot 8 inches above the required base flood elevation for the given location. So what that does from a sustainability standpoint is it gets the decks out of harm's way. One of the things that we saw, and I personally did a lot of inspection post-Sandy, and you went to homes, and what we found, not just in Margate, but all over the Jersey coast, what we found is even the homes who were built FEMA compliant at the time, those homes were fine, but their decks were low, ordinances required them to be at certain elevations. They were ripped apart in many locations because they were within harm's way. It's become apparent to us that bringing those improvements as well up above the floodplain, above the base flood elevation, is appropriate, and it puts less of a burden on the homeowners. And we think that by tying it to base flood and not allowing it to come to whatever the given finished floor is that you propose, still gets it to a safe level, but still keeps it at bay. Probably a bad play on words, but still keeps it low enough that we're not creating this absurd impact to our neighbors. And that was after a lengthy discussion with your planning and zoning board, because our office had originally said, let's say it just should be 4 inches below finished floor, for example. Some of your zoning board members, rightfully so, said, well, what if I come in with a proposed finished floor elevation of 14.5? That's a problem. So we tied it to base flood so that the decks remain sustainable. They're out of that floodplain. They're high enough to be up above the existing and/or proposed bulkheads, and will work well with the finished floors of the buildings that are, keep going higher and higher. So we think that the 1 foot 8 inches above base flood works both on the ocean front, it works on the bay front, it works on lagoon front, you've got some members of your planning board here. There was a lot of back and forth about this topic, and this is what we collectively arrived at based on our recommendations and the concerns of your planning board. Moving along, page 4 of 12 is actually, there's no changes there. We're just carrying the balance of the language in your existing ordinance forward. I'm now on page 5 of 12. Section 175-33, accessory structures and uses. It's actually been interpreted for a long period of time that there's no setback required for a pool to a bulkhead, but it doesn't actually state that in the ordinance. So that was just something that we were clarifying by putting that language into the ordinance. And we're getting toward the end here. The fee schedule. One of the issues that the staff has had is, when you construct a bulkhead, you have a pretty strict set of standards with regard to what you have to do to build a bulkhead in Margate. The elevation, location, all that. And you require an as-built survey to be performed at the end of it so that your code official can then make certain that it was built in accordance with your ordinance. But it didn't have enough teeth, so to speak, to force people to do the as-built survey. So the city then has to chase these property owners in order to get the as-built survey submitted, because it's not really tied to a CO for your building. So what we're proposing here is to increase the performance guarantee, I'll call it, it's an escrow, to a point of $2,000 where it's currently only $500. And that's going to encourage people to actually get the as-built survey done and submit it so that they can get their $2,000 back. Where with the current escrow, and it's become a very recurring problem. I mean, this sounds trivial, but it's become a real issue for your community in making sure that these bulkheads are being built properly. And in the current situation, it's almost more money to have the survey done than what the escrow is. So they just leave it there, and that's the end of it. And then your staff is chasing these people. So we think it sounds minor, but we think it's very important, again, to the sustainability of your community to make sure that when people do come in for new bulkheads and build them, they are then building them appropriately in accordance with your requirements. And then finally, we have a couple changes to the zoning schedules, pages 9 of 12 and 10 of 12. These changes really, what they are is mostly dealing with beachfront lots and how landscape coverage and lot coverage are calculated. There's always been some discrepancy as to if your bulkhead is inside your property line or outside your property line on the beachfront, what counts as coverage, what counts as lot area, what counts as what can you count towards your building coverage. So that the footnotes that are in these sections as proposed help to clarify that topic so that the land use administrator doesn't have to continue to have those discussions and arguments with builders and developers. And then the last item with regard to schedule changes deals with Schedule B4, which should be applying to bayfront, canal front, and lagoon front single-family lots only, but the prior title of it wasn't clear, and there was always confusion as to which schedule or which lots Schedule B4 should be applying to. And then the final topic in our recommendations deals with bulkheads. So we have not proposed to make any changes to bulkhead heights on the ocean front. The ordinance currently requires elevation 13. Based on our studies, based on what has been built out there, based on elevations of recent storms, post-Sandy most specific, or Superstorm Sandy most specifically, we believe elevation 13 is an appropriate elevation. What we are recommending is a modification to the bulkhead heights on the bayfront, lagoon front, canal front lots. Your land use ordinance currently permits elevation, a range in elevations from 7.5 to 9 in 1988 datum. So if I have a house on Rumson Avenue or any of the Penrose Canal, wherever I happen to be, on the canals or the open bayfront, I have my option. I can build my bulkhead at 7.5. I can build my bulkhead at 8, all the way up to 9. That's the way the ordinance currently is written. Well, and that has seemed to work for years. But then we had a storm, which proved that 7.5 is too low. So what we felt is that while we're bringing the decks up to get the decks out of harm's way, we didn't want to create such an onerous condition that bulkhead heights are so high that they are obliterating views and causing real, I'll say, social type problems within the community. We said, you know what, why don't we just, well, as opposed to making a radical change, why don't we just say we're going to say it has to be at 9. I'm already permitted to build my bulkhead at 9. Let's get rid of the low end. Let's get rid of the minimum, and let's require people to build their bulkheads at elevation 9. There are bulkheads at 9 along the bayfront, lagoon front lots now. I've seen them. I don't believe that they are onerous on neighboring properties. Depending on where you are, again, as I mentioned, they're about chest high in the backyards. And when you look at where finished floor heights are being driven, when you look at our recommendations for deck heights, when you tie that into this change of a proposed elevation of a bulkhead height, it all works very, very well together. And you now have a situation where you can create a decent transition. Even if you want to go a little higher with your floor, you can create a decent transition from your floor to your deck. Your bulkhead can basically be at the face of your deck, coming all the way up to the bottom of it, essentially. And it works well for each one of the individual lots. Are there some conditions where you've got houses that were renovated and they're pre-Sandy and their floors are down to elevation 7 right now and they're not planning to raise, and are they going to be in a hole? Yeah, they are, but let's be honest. That's not what, from a sustainability standpoint, that's not what you want as a community. You want that person to raise his house. You want him to raise his bulkhead. You want him to bring his deck up to get them out of harm's way. So if we're looking at, and again, you have to keep in mind what this was all about. This was all about
studying the effects of what we learned from Sandy, and figuring out a way, as this community goes into the future, to make things better for the residents and safer, obviously. So we think these recommendations do that. We think they certainly do. You can never say they don't have an impact. They're going to have an impact on adjacent property owners in cases, but we think that the recommendations make sense. We think that after long discussions with your planning board on multiple nights, we believe that they're in full agreement with our recommendations at this point. In fact, just as one quick example, we were originally discussing the idea of, on bayfront lots, elevations of bulkheads being at 10, because most of your bayfront, the water area is in a V zone, which requires higher base flood elevations, as you know, because of wave action. When you get into your lagoons and your canals, then the water area drops down to an A zone. So our original recommendation was 10 on the bayfront and 9 on the ocean front. And I'll be honest, your planning board said, you're crazy. We're a bulkhead at 10 on some of these low lots. You walk up to it, you're staring at a bulkhead. And we understand that, and that's why we did this process as an iterative process with your board. We think this is a good product. We think that this study is an invaluable tool for the city of Margate. We obviously support our recommendations, and we're happy to continue any discussion with regard to them. What Arthur's mentioning is one of the things with regard to, as you elevate bulkheads alone, when you have a low-lying island like Margate, they don't prevent flooding. You have to have, this is the long-term, 30, 40, 50, 60-year plan we're talking about here, but you've got to have a barrier, and now you've got a low-lying area. You now have to figure out a way to get your stormwater out. So a comprehensive stormwater management plan, together with improved bulkhead heights, is the ultimate goal for a community like the city of Margate. And so it's more than just studying. When you look at how you deal with your flooding, it's more than just studying the bulkheads. You have to also look at your stormwater management system as you guys move forward.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Art, thank you.
Any other questions at this point?
Anybody have any questions?
I just
before we
have a
get
comment, Mayor.
That's right.
John and Art, I have to tell you, I didn't get a chance to really review it in depth, but I think this is a masterpiece. I want to thank you, your firm, for your experience, your expertise, and having John. It's a great document for us to work off of. I've read our planning board solicitor's recommendation, so I'm sure as we go forward, and our former planner, Roger Rubin, a lot of the recommendations are going to be implemented as we go through. As you know, we're still going through, we're benefiting by Sandy, not only from grant ends, but having professionals like you working for our city, so we really appreciate. This is a document that I believe is second to none. You did a great job.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I thank you also, for everybody and all the citizens of Margate. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you want the 5-minute introduction or just a 30-second?
Sure, both. Good afternoon. My name is Despina Hess. I am a member of the Planning and Zoning Board here in Margate. Essentially, my purpose in being here to speak before you is just to give you a brief background for the basis of our recommendation in Mr. Barnhart's report, and give you just a summary of the reasons for that recommendation. To begin, just get straight to the point, the recommendation of the Planning Board to Mr. Barnhart has been that we support a 9-foot bulkhead level. We believe that, as the ordinance currently reads, and of course we're all familiar with it now, is ranging between 7.5 to 9 feet. This discontinuous bulkhead level, we believe, is a threat to the bayside of our town. Everyone's already familiar with the massive bayside flooding, and I think it's no surprise that a majority of the community, majority of the residents are opposed to the dune project. And the reason for me raising that issue is I believe that the city of Margate would be consistent in their fight against this dune project by promoting this 9-foot continuous bayfront bulkhead level. Essentially, we would be putting our money where our mouth is. If we're saying, no, the flooding is not coming from our beach side, it's coming from our bay side, well then let's make efforts to improve that bay side where the flooding is happening. So that really is the purpose for my presence here. I don't claim to be an engineer, but what I look to is logic, and if we're saying the floods come from the bays, it's not so often that you can identify the root of a problem, and I believe that we're fortunate because not only can we identify the root of our problem here, bayside flooding, we're also present with the solution. So not only can we locate this problem, we have a feasible means of increasing our solution, which would be to protect that bulkhead. And what you've heard Mr. Barnhart say and what you've heard me say a few times here is it's not really a major change to the ordinance. The ordinance by right already permits 9-foot bulkheads. So what we're asking for is the continuous bulkhead level. If you can just imagine it in lay terms, if you have a solid wall and there's that gap, say you have a 9-foot wall and we have a 7.5-foot gap right there, it's no question the water's going to find that route. It's going to find the weak link. So it would be a disservice to the town to ask residents to have this discontinuous line because it would take no effect. If you really want to make a difference, it's essential that we have a continuous bulkhead bayfront support system for our town. So essentially, my purpose again here is to just let you know, it's one thing to hear Mr. Barnhart say, this is the planning board's recommendation and I'm presenting it to you, but we took a lot of thought, we've listened to his expertise, and I believe it came in at a 10-foot, correct me if I'm wrong, it may have been a 10-foot recommendation, and we did take serious thought into the 9-foot recommendation to the commissioners. As I said, the ordinance already permits 9 foot by right, so I think it would be foolish to ask us to lower that, because if we have 9 foot by right, how could we possibly ask you to recommend a lower bulkhead than what's already permitted? Looking to the sustainability of the town, not 10 years, 20 years, 100 years, it's essential that we take this opportunity, an opportunity that we as a city control, and to make this change and to essentially push this continuous 9-foot bulkhead level. Essentially, that summarizes our purpose and basis for the board's recommendation, and would urge you, for the basis and the sustainability of Margate, to take under serious consideration and to accept this continuous 9-foot bulkhead height.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Any questions?
Anyone? Thank you,
for your
Despy.
time.
Did a great job.
They did. Very good. Not now, Steve. Not now. At this point, we'll move into department head reports. Jimmy, you want to start, please?
I have nothing to report, just very busy.
Okay. Roger 2? Roger 1. Why don't you come up, sit down.
He's happy now.
I see we have a welcome guest appearance from Mr. Rubin. Good to see you. I'd like to thank John Barnhart and Pazio and Mazer Consulting for providing this very valid report. I'm sure we'll make some tweaks here and there as needed, but it's an outstanding report. Thank you.
Johanna?
I just want to let the board aware that the financial disclosure forms will be going out soon, so that will need to be completed.
Thank you, Johanna. Scott?
We have a number of things we can talk about on the workshop, and I'm glad that Arthur and John are here. First and foremost, we have two areas of bulkhead that have failed along Amherst Avenue, and as you know, and I know John Amadeo's been right on top of this with our building department, we have a grant application pending that Jim Rotella is processing. John, I think you talked to, I forget who you talked to at Remington and Burning. We all know that Eddie's has been out ill and not been able to put together a bulkhead plan, which is why I raised that point, Arthur, because our city engineer, Eddie's been hospitalized, and we have a deadline to go for a $3+ million grant for a new bulkhead along Amherst Avenue, which desperately needs it. And so this aspect of a 9-foot hard and fast number is something that we really have to make a decision. So, as I understand it, John, chime in, you spoke with who, Remington, to make sure these plans are in. Our deadline is in April.
April 20th.
April 20. So we're going for a $3+ million grant, which we think, Jim Rotella tells me we have an excellent shot at getting. And we certainly have a very serious need to have that. One of the things that Roger McClernand and I have been talking about on these elevations is our concern about if it is 9 foot, you have, in some cities, they compel you, there are marks on all their poles to tell you where 9 foot is. And one of the biggest concerns, you all know that I'm very involved with the dredging and the bulkheads and all that, the fear that if we go 9 foot, we create a 4 or 5 foot wall. I think you've addressed that. It sounds like you really do need that promenade, or wherever you're going to call it, if you want people to be able to see the water from Amherst Avenue. I would strongly urge, and as Roger told me, Ocean City has done this, they mark poles over there so you visually see where is the elevation. You take our lagoons, for instance. I built a brand new bulkhead 6 years ago. I think some people realize it's probably the most litigated bulkhead and deck in the state of New Jersey. I'm at 6.7, and mine was brand new, and I was 2 feet above everybody else. You're now talking about 5 or 6 feet in these lagoons. Arthur, I know you and John know your stuff. Just want you to take one more look at it, because we get into access. How do you get into your boat? How do you have your ramp? If you have a 5 or 6 foot wall mandated with no play, no 7.5 to 9, you're really locking in some homeowners to a difficult situation, perhaps, on how they access their dock. How do they plant their ramp? I know you guys have given this some thought. I'm sure you can assure me that it's going to be fine, but that was one of my concerns. And as we move forward on this, and the board, you have to make a final decision, it might be good if we went out and looked at some of these bulkheads. For instance, my neighbor just built a brand new bulkhead. Remember, if he's at 7.5, and I don't know you, ma'am, the new planning board member, 9 under our ordinance was 1929. The new standard is 1988, which is 1.3 feet. So under the old ordinance, when you said 9 foot, you're now talking 10.3 feet. Just so we understand that. Most people, that's very hard to understand. The other thing is, Hurricane Sandy's floodwaters was at about 8 in 1988. Am I wrong, John?
No, you're
Hurricane right. I know it was 9.3 in 29.
About 8.6, wasn't it?
So when you say 7.5, 9, you're still going to have flooding regardless of what elevation the bulkheads are. We're not going to be watertight. Bayshore Drive, they're V-zone. They have a fetch there of over 1.5 miles to Pleasantville. They get waves. Their elevation's higher. We may want to not have the same elevation in the lagoon, because now when that deck gets built, believe me, I know, it cuts somebody's view off, and they are very imposing. But I appreciate the tremendous work you've done. Your booklet is excellent, and we are pushing this grant application, so we need to make a decision sooner rather than later. And I respect your opinion. I know you know more about this than anybody.
Just quickly, with the grant application, Scott, I haven't seen any of those documents, but I wouldn't think you necessarily have to specify a top height. So the urgency for you to make this decision, I don't believe is there. I mean, if you're going to say, we're going to build a bulkhead along Amherst Avenue, an engineered bulkhead to withstand the forces of wave action and whatnot, I think that's what you need for that submittal.
All I know is they said they had to have the plans from the engineer.
I mean, if you want to let us look at those plans, we'll help you with that and help Jim, Jim Rotella on that. So whatever you
I was hoping you'd say that.
I will do that, whatever. I'd like to see that as much as all of you built there. I mean,
Well,
as far as the elevation is concerned, where originally, when you mentioned the bayfront, the outside bayfront with the long fetch, that's where we start. That is V-zone property.
And maybe it should be 10.
On the map. So we started at elevation 10 there. And just so everyone understands, new elevation 10, for us old timers, we grew up with the mean sea level datum, which we all knew sea level was where it was. We all know where sea level is, and 10 feet above that was the 100-year flood. Well, the differential is 1.3 feet. The new elevation 10 that we're talking about is 1.3 foot higher than the old elevation 10, the 29 datum that we've lived with forever and ever and ever. We'll have to teach ourselves this as we go forward. So we have that, if you will call it that, a 1.3 foot buffer from the new elevations to the old. And now your ordinance for all your new construction of homes requires 2 feet, in most zones, 2 feet above that new elevation. So if you're in a base flood elevation 10, 2 feet above, the floors are up at 12. The bottom of the joists are down at maybe 11 or thereabouts. So you're well above any flood that we've ever had in history for all the new construction, which is fantastic. I mean, it's great you adopted the ordinance as you did. But now we get into this bulkhead conversation and flooding, and Margate streets are, for the most part, very low. We could put bulkheads all around the city, and yet you have a high tide and a heavy rain. The same streets that flood today are going to flood then. You're not going to stop that. The way to assist that, not stop it, would be with, as John mentioned briefly, to look at your stormwater management system and to institute a pump system for these low-lying areas. We worked on a project like that a couple years ago at Resorts International. When they're on the ocean front, they have, as you all know, resorts. If you've ever been inside much of that building, there's a very low basement in that building. So low that it's down at sea level. And they have unfortunately, all of their heavy electrical equipment down there. When we had Sandy, they have a storm drain out front in the ocean. It backed up, and water came into the building. It came within that far of about a $5 million cost in shutting that building down for a year. Would have killed the electric system, that entire property. They were just so ecstatic that it just stopped where it did. What we've now done, we worked and Jim worked on it with us, Jim Rotella. There were applications submitted for grant money for a pump system. They're taking the storm drain that's out on the outfall on the ocean front, and they're going to institute a chamber and a pump system, very elaborate, to make sure that at times like I just mentioned for Margate, and like times Resorts experience in that storm, the pumps will kick on when the water reaches a certain level, and will evacuate the water and pump the water, if you will, back into the ocean. In our case, it's going to be pumped back into the bay. So that can be done. There's another system like that in Atlantic City, Scott, right at Fisherman's Park, all the way up in the inlet. Oh, the area just floods terribly. Those poor folks up there, the water, every time there's a northeast high tide, the streets are all underwater. They've experienced this forever and ever and ever. They're going to have a higher bulkhead, and they're going to have a pump system put up in that area as well. These are the things that, Ventnor Heights as well, Scott, you know, we're talking about Ventnor.
It worked, too, in the Heights.
Yeah.
And as John and Maury, I think you of course know, and Mayor knows, we have this Ventnor shared pump station at Garden.
Calvert, right.
And I think we have
We're starting
Friday.
Tomorrow it starts. Yep.
Well, part of the
And that's
integrated-
going to help drain the north end of Margate
Yeah.
tremendously.
Oh, it will. So you start with the bulkheads, keep the stormwaters out, then we worry about the low-lying areas, look at the stormwater system, study that system, get a pump system wherever you can, upgrade the size of your pipes where you can, and systematically attack this. And then at the end of the day, these nuisance storms will be addressed, the big heavy storms will be addressed with the 13 on the ocean front, the 9 or 10 or whatever you decide on the bayfront. And at that point, that's the best you're ever going to do with a city with low-lying streets the way we have them.
So you're advocating a pump system
Oh,
to
yeah.
help reduce the stormwater, which, of course, everybody knows Washington Avenue is our number
Oh, yeah.
one spot.
I look at step one is the bulkheading, step
You're gonna
two
have to
is
do
look at that drainage system and do what you can there.
All right.
All right?
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Art.
I've got a couple more. There's several resolutions on. One of them is to hire Mr. Ponzio's firm to do the subdivisions of the parcels that are owned by the city landward of our oceanfront bulkheads, similar to when we did Rumson Avenue. We have about, I think, 6 or 8 other parcels where various property owners are interested in paying for the construction of new bulkheads and acquiring that title that is between their property line and our oceanfront bulkhead. To do that, Mr. Rubin pointed out, we asked him for this, he said that the zoning is government, right, rather than residential. So it will have to be a minor subdivision to create these lots, they're small parcels, and then change the zoning as well. We have several individuals very anxious to pay for new bulkheads. And just to refresh everybody's memory, last year, 2 years ago, when we did Rumson Avenue, that was 229 feet of brand-new bulkhead that the gentleman who took title to a 7 to 8 foot wide strip, paid for all of that, and that job was well over $300,000, I believe. I think it was at $14.75 a foot. So that dovetails into a request I received from Eric Goldstein for the gentleman who's buying the Turner property. He wants to make an application to the state to replace in kind, in the spot, Mr. Ponzio's firm, I believe, drew this up. I know you did. I'm looking at your name here. And Commissioner Blumberg, I really had the chance to talk to you. I didn't get a chance to talk to you, Mayor or John. They're making an application to put a new house there, but they also want permission to replace our bulkhead, city bulkhead, at their cost. Well, we're not to that point yet. They want permission to ask the DEP for authority to replace the bulkhead. I would say we'll drive the guy up to Trenton and deliver the application for him if he wants. Please replace that bulkhead because it's in terrible condition. So to that end, I have Resolution 42-216, which will allow the mayor, with your authorization, to sign the application. It does not obligate the city to transfer title. It does not obligate the city to spend one dime. Jimmy, what?
We just have to make sure it's not on the Rossi list. That it's
It is not
agreed.
on the Rossi list. I've checked all that. The Rossi list, that's our Green Acres list. So if you're Lot 18, but part of Lot 18 and has a map, that's on Green Acres. But the strip that's behind, and this strip's maybe, 5 foot behind the bulkhead to the property line. And anybody walks the beach, I know more, you go to the beach here, you've seen it. It's terrible condition, this bulkhead. So that is, and this just came up, they said, could we please have the city's permission to get the approval from DEP? I would strongly urge us to approve it. I see no downside to it. It has nothing to do with transferring title at this point. They will negotiate that further. That's coming down the line. So I know I'm talkative, but there's been a lot going on. Two other things. You know we have our joint application for dredging all Margate's Bayfront. General Graham from the Army Corps, we asked him to have the Army Corps support. We have our meeting on March 9th. Anybody wants to come, love to have you. I'm going, Stu Farrell's going. I don't know about our engineer. Roger McClernand might be going. You're going to go with me, right? Commissioners, we can go. It's an informative thing. It's our pre-application joint conference with the Army Corps of Engineers and the DEP. You all saw the articles in the paper recently. DEP's pushing us to use not Shelter Island, not Amherst Avenue. They're pushing us to use, they call Site 86, which is off Wellington Avenue off of Chelsea Heights. That would be about a 3.5 mile long pipe. It's certainly doable. It could accommodate up to 680,000 cubic yards. We're looking at 150 to 300 and something cubic yards, depending on what we dredge. If you read the newspapers, you see what Ocean City's doing, for instance. $10 million to dredge their lagoons. They're basically paying $100 a cubic yard. Nobody's suggesting that we pay that. If we can find a place close like this dredge hole, it'd be a lot cheaper than $100 a yard. We also received last week notice from the state, and this is exactly what we need to be doing. This is the state's application to itself to dredge out Risley's Channel, dredge out a channel going all the way from basically Longport all the way over to, what is that, Seaview Village on Margate Bridge Road, Absecon Creek, 2 locations in Pleasantville. These are the plans. This is wonderful because they're taking it serious now. All the pressure we're putting on, not just Margate, but everybody. Here it is. They've actually now made the application, sent Margate notice. Here's our blueprint for what we need for our dredging, right here. So we've made a lot of progress. As you know, we had that conference yesterday at Great Bay, had a long talk with the Assistant DEP Commissioner and the lady who's in charge of the maritime DOT aspect. She will have control over this site. She has a lot to say about our application. She has consented to come to our March 9th meeting in Trenton, so she's going to be there too, which is great. I'm not saying it's getting dredged next year, but we're a little bit closer now than we were 2 days ago. So we're getting there. And that's about it. Any questions? It is in Trenton, 501 East State Street with the DEP. It'll have about 25 people. It was General Graham from the Army Corps. I said, General, can you send somebody there for the head supervisor's coming?
Good job.
And so we're getting some action.
Good. Thank you, Scott.
You're welcome, Mayor. I know I talk too much. I can't help it.
Chief Wilson?
I want to thank everybody. Another great day for the police department. I think Steve Edelbach's going to be an exceptional addition, and look forward to him graduating in July. Switching gears from the business administrator's office, I'd like to bring your attention to Resolution 41-2016, which is asking for your approval on the recently negotiated Employees Association contract. And I'd like to bring just some highlights to you for consideration. For employees hired prior to January 1, 2013, it'll be 2% for 13, 3% for 17. For 16, 3% for 17. For those people hired after January of 2013, it's actually the salaries are going to stay frozen at the 15 rate, with the exception of 2 people who fall in the middle, and they're going to receive a one-time jump of 3% for this year only. And they're actually in their 3rd year, so they'll move into the 4th year, and that's frozen at the 15 rate. There'll be anybody hired as of January 1, 2016 will not receive longevity until after 15 years of service, so that's been frozen. We've also agreed to a college stipend of $500 for a bachelor's, $250 for an associate's, as well as a CDL stipend of $500 beginning next year, 2017. We've agreed to do the same thing that police and fire did with the sick time buyback. If you have 80 days, essentially you need 80 sick days in the bank to be able to buy back 5 on a yearly basis, which gives you a minimum of 75. And that's it. I would like to congratulate or thank Ed McLean, Jim Friel, and Tara Mazza for their cooperation and working this out. It was really a wonderful experience, and I'm recommending approval of this contract. Other than that, everything's great.
Thank you, Chief. Lisa?
Very quickly, you'll see on the agenda, we have 2 ordinances set for introduction, one general capital in the amount of $3,670,000 and one for our utility capital in $2.1 million. All those items were sent to you for your review. And we are also introducing our municipal budget. The budget will be posted on the website after we have the recorded vote, along with a copy of the user-friendly budget that is now a required part of the budget process. There were a few copies of the user-friendly budget available, but like I said, both will be available most likely tomorrow. If not tomorrow, on Monday, they will be on the website. There's a 1.3 cent tax increase for the local purpose rate. It brings our local rate to 0.614. The major factors driving the budget, we had a reduction in our capital surplus that was anticipated. Last year we anticipated $567,000. Because our capital surplus had been dwindling this year, we anticipated $367,000 less than that. In addition to that, on the appropriation side, we had an overall increase in our statutory expenditures of 6.75%, which is primarily our pension contributions that are set by the state. Overall, between the public employee and the police and fire retirement system, there was a total increase of slightly over $170,000. Our salary and wage line item, it pretty much held steady in spite of the renegotiated contracts. The increase is less than 1% for this year. And we are set to adopt the budget on April 7th. That's pretty much all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Chief Tabasco.
Mayor, all is well in the fire department. I would like to mention that I've been working, myself, and Deputy Chief Adams with Beach Patrol Chief Greg Smallwood, doing our pre-plans for the upcoming summer. Thank you.
Thank you. Frank?
In Public Works, we'll be starting to flush fire hydrants again, April 4th to the 8th. And we're waiting for tonight's storm to see what happens along the coast here. We are prepared. We do have crews ready. That's all I have.
Thank you, Frank. Marty?
I just want to thank Lisa and the team for the good work on the budget. Appreciate all the hard work that went into it. That's all I have, Mike.
John?
I'm good, Mayor.
I'm good, too. At this point, we'll open for public comment. 3 minutes on anything that was discussed here today. If you have anything else to discuss, that would be at the 5 o'clock meeting.
There you go, buddy.
Just for me.
Is this the contract, Ed?
Nope.
Something that was talked about here?
Yes.
Go for it, sorry.
Thanks, sir.
Your name and address, please.
My name is Ed Berger, and I am at 9402 Amherst Avenue. And I would like to come up to just briefly discuss some of the things I heard here today about the elevation of the bulkhead on Amherst Avenue, as well as some of the information on the report. Can you hear me okay? The information in Art's report as well. And I'd like to know, first of all, as from a business standpoint, because a 9-foot bulkhead obviously would have a tremendous impact on the restaurants down there and their ability to see the bay from a seating level, if these reports are going to be readily available before we have to make a decision, or before you have to make a decision on the application for your grant, Scott, so the business owners could take a look at perhaps some of the aesthetic aspects of what is being recommended by the engineering firm? If I can get an answer on that, Mr. Mayor, through the...
What do you think, Roger McLaren? Can we estimate bulkhead height on that application for the grant? I guess we could.
We'd have to look at the numbers and we can come up with a
I think that I think having the business owners being able to at least participate vocally, at some level as to what the what is being recommended would probably head off issues down the road.
We can work on that and get back to you. That's a good idea.
Yeah, and I think that both, there's only a couple of residential on Amherst Avenue. There's only a couple of residential organizations that I would reach out to as well. The Harbor Vista, which I'm a part of, the folks down at just next to Memories. I'm sure that they have an organization, and if there was going to be a radical change in the elevation across the street, I think that's something that each one of us would like to participate in at some level in a public meeting.
Well, why don't we schedule a meeting or something with them and show them?
Okay, why don't you work that out with Scott?
Yeah,
Okay?
I'd like to do that.
I loved Roger McLernan's discussion with me about putting some marks on those poles, so we're all looking at the same thing. We're not guesstimating. Here's what it is. And I think you said Ocean City does that, right?
As part of the road program, for every survey, every time they survey the road, they put markers in the poles saying where elevation 10 is.
Because we looked the other day.
Benefits the CRS program, too.
How would pontoons work, but it's different when you can see it. And you're right, we could be sitting in tomatoes looking at a wall.
You're going to be looking at a wall, and that's why. And again, I like the idea of the lines because it really, with no pun intended, would create a level playing field for all of those business owners down there to see that everything across the board really was consistent. So, that doesn't hurt either. So I would concur with you on that. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Any other public comment?
There we go, that does.
Steve Warner, 103 North Sumner Avenue. I think the mayor and commissioner, you should concern yourselves with the long-term viability of Margate. What's best, what's going to be good for the next 50 years, okay? And with the Back Bay and with the ocean. I know for the last 20 years probably, I'm looking at these requests for bonded indebtedness or whatever these two ordinances, and you got another like 1.6, 1.8 million for doing the streets, and this has been going on forever. Okay, maybe the gas company is going to repave most of the streets, I think. Anyhow, I think it's time to put the money to something else than just repaving the streets if we're going to borrow the money. And I think Mr. Ponzio and the engineer, I don't know his name, has some very good ideas, which is building up the bulkheads and then getting a way to pump out the water. And really that's something that would make a lot of sense to me for the long-term viability of Margate so that we can respond to these floods and not just have a disaster every time. So I think as far as like more cars and a lot of these other, I don't know exactly what's requested here, but it seems to me that the city's got a lot of really new cars right now, a good fleet. Maybe there's something that needs to be purchased, but maybe cut back on some of the buying of this, that, and the other thing, and use the money for the long-term viability of this city. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone else?
Sewell, 22 West Drive. Two quick questions, Mayor. If indeed, as the city planner has stated, that the conclusions of the Ponzio study are very valid, would it not be the responsibility of this commission to follow the findings of that study insofar as the litany of ordinance changes that they have suggested within that study? I think the more expeditiously they are passed and approved, the sooner new owners and new developers will be able to comply to a higher, safer standard. And I strongly urge this commission, if they do believe in this Ponzio study, to follow its recommendations and implement them by passing the new ordinances that they have clearly and specifically and expressly stipulated in that study. I don't think there should be dawdling or procrastination, Mayor. I think that's the inappropriate route to take. Secondly, Mayor, following up on the CFO's comments concerning the budget, it's come to my attention that there are allegations afloat
I'm going to go meet Roger in
of
the office. I got to meet and talk to him or something, okay?
inappropriate spendings in the recreation budget. Is there any substance to those allegations, Mayor, or can you quash them, perhaps?
None that I know of, John.
All right. Can you make an inquiry concerning those budgetary irregularities?
I will do that.
Thank you immensely.
Anyone else?
Steve Altman, 9003 Amherst Avenue, Margate. I have two questions about dredging. I'm curious, I know there are no engineers here at the moment, but if we increase the volume of water in the bay by dredging, are we adding to our problems during a storm? Does that volume of water then become an issue when water is pressed back against the bulkheads that are being proposed?
I have the answer. I've asked the engineers that myself. They say absolutely not. It'd be infinitesimal, small, the difference.
It's an infinitesimal thing?
Because it's all gravitational and wind. Would you agree, Roger? And we do have an engineer in the room.
Oh, we do? I
Yes, we do.
apologize.
A very experienced engineer.
Yes.
Would you agree? Would you?
It's so minutiae, you can't even factor it. You won't notice any change.
There you
Is
go.
that, okay? Is that
Thank you. Secondly, boats are notoriously polluting. There's no comparison to the controls of pollution as like on automobiles. And so if we dredge the back bay and encourage boating around the island, are we not encouraging pollutants in the atmosphere and only exacerbating the issues of global warming going forward?
I don't have that answer just now. I don't.
And by the way, I'm in favor of dredging. But listening to all this discussion, these are the two things that occurred to me.
Are you serious with that question?
Yes, I am. I certainly am. I mean, it's pretty obvious that human activity has caused the melting of glaciers.
Well,
If we encourage pollution around our island, are we not encouraging our own problem?
I'll be happy to answer that one. Absolutely not. If we dredge the back bays, there'll be more kayakers, more rowboats, more paddle boards, and that lessens global warming.
When I was a
Good
kid-
for global warming.
When I was a kid growing up, we had sailboats on the back bay.
There you go.
And we have nothing like that.
That's why we're too
That's
shallow.
why we have to dredge, so we have
No,
sailboats.
I'm not arguing against dredging. I'm just a couple of ideas that have occurred to me that I have not heard anybody address. So that's why I'm raising them.
We're pretty confident that we will not contribute to global warming if we dredge the back bays of Margate.
Thank you.
I was never so happy when you were speaking to hear the buzzer, Steve. Thank you very much for your comments. Any other public comment? Is there a motion to close public comment?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Joanna?
Mayor Becker?
Yes.
Commissioner Amadeus?
Yes.
Commissioner Blumberg?
Yes,
Motion to adjourn the meeting, please.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Mayor Becker?
Yes.
Commissioner Amadeus?
Yes.
Commissioner Blumberg?
Yes.